In this video, we're counting down Illinois' 10 most brutal inmates. And this isn't a famous names list. It's a damage report, from Chicago to the suburbs. Picture it, a July 4th parade snaps into panic. A chicken shop at closing becomes a cold case for years. A house goes quiet, and the clock starts on a missing child. And in one case, even a life sentence still wasn't the end. We're going from 10 to 1, ranking them by body count, predatory intent, and public terror. Straight facts. What happened, how they got caught, and what the courts did. Let's go. Number 10. William Balfour. Julia Hudson got home that Friday afternoon and knew something was wrong before she even stepped inside. The house was too still. No TV noise, no footsteps, no normal life. Then she walked in, and the bottom dropped out. 2 family members were dead, and her 7-year-old son, Julian King, was gone. And this wasn't just any Chicago case. Julia is Jennifer Hudson's sister, so within hours the story was everywhere. But the real pressure wasn't the cameras, it was the clock. A child was missing, and police had to move fast. Investigators zeroed in on William Balfour, Julia's estranged husband, known as Flex. The timeline in the case file described a marriage that had been breaking for months. Julia and Balfour were separated, and multiple witnesses said he was furious about her seeing someone else. People close to the family told police he had made threats, straight to the point, no ambiguity, about what he would do if she didn't come back. On the morning of October 24th, 2008, prosecutors said Balfour showed up at the Hudson home on Chicago's South Side. Julia let him in to talk. Then she left for work and locked the door behind her. Inside were her mother, Darnell Donnerson, her brother, Jason Hudson, and Julian. Not long after, neighbors reported hearing gunfire. When Julia returned around 2:30 p.m., she found her mother and brother had been killed. Jason's white SUV was missing. Julian was missing. Julia immediately told police to look at Balfour. The state's case was built like a chain, not a single gotcha. Phone records showed Balfour's cell activity in the area that morning, with gaps lining up with the key window. Acta transit pass tied to him had not been used that day, cutting into parts of his story. Police tracked him to the home of his girlfriend, Shanta Cathy, and arrested him as officers closed in. Cathy later testified, Balfour showed up, rushed, changed clothes, and pushed her to support an alibi. Other witnesses described things he allegedly said afterward that sounded like a confession without using the word confession. 3 days later, Jason's SUV was located, and Julian was found inside. Out of respect, we'll stop the details right there, because that's the moment this case stopped being headline shocking and became permanently heartbreaking. A Cook County jury convicted Balfour of 3 counts of first-degree murder, along with charges tied to the home invasion, kidnapping, and the stolen vehicle. The judge sentenced him to 3 consecutive natural life terms, meaning he will die in prison. Number 9. Christopher Vaughn. Just after 5 a.m. on a June morning in Illinois, a call goes out near the I-55 and Bluff Road interchange. A pickup is stopped in a wooded area. A man is there, injured, shaken, and covered in blood. His name is Christopher Vaughn. He tells police what sounds like a nightmare. Someone attacked his family. Then officers find the SUV nearby. Inside are Vaughn's wife, Kimberly, and their 3 children, Abigail, Cassandra, and Blake. All were found dead. The scene is instantly bigger than one traffic stop. It's a family wiped out, and the only adult survivor is the husband and father standing outside. Vaughn is treated for injuries that aren't life-threatening. Then investigators start pulling on the threads. At first, he denies harming his family. But the case doesn't hinge on one dramatic confession. It hinges on motive, planning, and whether his story can survive the timeline. In court, prosecutors argued Vaughn wanted out. Not just out of the marriage, out of normal life. They told jurors he had been talking about disappearing into the Canadian wilderness, living off the grid, and starting over with no responsibilities. According to trial testimony, he exchanged emails with a man in Canada about survival and long-term living in remote areas. And he even took a trip to Yukon in 2007 to scout locations. Then there's the timing. Records presented at trial showed Vaughn visited a shooting range in Plainfield on June 6th and again on June 13th, the day before the deaths. Prosecutors didn't say that alone proves guilt. They argued it fit a pattern, preparation, then execution. Police interrogated Vaughn for hours. The jury later watched those recorded interviews, long stretches where Vaughn repeats his denial, explains his movements, and tries to shape a version of events that detectives quickly focused on. Prosecutors said it didn't match the physical evidence. The defense tried to punch holes in it. They argued Kimberly was the shooter, and they pointed to her medications and the stress inside the marriage. The jury didn't buy it. A Will County jury convicted Vaughn on 4 counts of first-degree murder. The judge stacked 4 consecutive natural life terms. No parole, no way back. And what makes this case hit isn't just the crime. It's the motive the state laid out in court, treating a family like the last thing standing between him and freedom. Number 8. Robin Gecht. It's after midnight in Chicago, in early October 1982. A young woman is walking when a red van rolls up. In seconds, she's pulled inside. The street goes quiet again, like nothing happened. But the hours that follow end up in court as one of the most disturbing predator cases Illinois would prosecute in that era. The man at the center was Robin Gecht. Court records say the victim, identified by initials, was 19 years old. Police said she was taken against her will, attacked, and left badly hurt. But she survived. That one fact changes everything. Because she lived, this case didn't fade into rumor. It became a direct fight over identification, pattern, and whether the jury believed what she described. No single detail solved it. The timeline did. First, the victim described key details, especially the red van, and later identified Gecht through photo and lineup procedures. Second, prosecutors introduced testimony about another incident months earlier that they argued showed a similar method: a sudden grab, control, and sexual violence. The defense pushed back with an alibi and challenged the other incident testimony. But prosecutors argued the alibi didn't hold up, pointing to contradictions and records that undercut the I was home version. You'll sometimes hear Gecht's name connected in media to a broader early 1980s Chicago crime circle nicknamed the Ripper Crew. Here's the clean way to frame it. The convictions that drive Gecht's Illinois sentence came from a case built around rape, deviant sexual assault, aggravated kidnapping, and attempted murder. Serious charges that show predatory, repeated violence without getting graphic. A jury convicted him, and the judge stacked the punishment to be crushing. Multiple long terms were imposed, and the court ran key parts consecutively, bringing the total to 120 years, the legal version of never going home. Even decades later, Gecht kept fighting. He filed post-conviction motions seeking DNA testing, arguing science could crack the case open. But reviewing courts noted the state's proof was already strong, centered on the survivor's identification and supporting evidence, so DNA would not change the foundation of the verdict. Gecht remains in Illinois custody on a sentence built to last decades. What makes this one stick isn't mystery. It's the method: a late-night street, a red van, a predator, and a survivor who lived long enough to put a name on it. Number 7. Richard "Ricky" Holman. It's the middle of the night in southern Illinois in the late 1970s. A quiet house gets hit, drawers pulled, property gone. And when the family realizes what happened, the worst part isn't the missing things. It's the person who isn't getting back up. That's the pattern investigators and courts would later describe in the case of Richard "Ricky" Holman, a teenage offender tied to a violent spree where robbery wasn't the end goal. Silence was. One of the key cases lands in Maryville, Illinois, in July 1979. An 83-year-old woman, Esther Sepmeyer, is found dead in her home after it's been ransacked. By the time it reached trial, the story looked like this. A .22 firearm connected to the house was missing, and the investigation quickly focused on a pair, Holman and Gervais Davis. Here's where the story turns into a legal knife fight. Both men end up in jail on other matters, and then, according to the Illinois Supreme Court record, statements start coming out. Davis writes a handwritten list describing multiple violent crimes in the area. Holman gives statements too, describing several killings that line up with that list. But when it comes to the Sepmeyer murder, they do what partners in crime often do when the stakes are life and death. They point at each other. Both admit taking property. Both deny being the shooter. The case didn't hinge on one moment. It held because each piece matched the next. Fingerprint evidence tied Holman to the scene, and investigators recovered items connected to the crimes through searches linked to Davis. Prosecutors argued that even with the finger pointing, the evidence showed Holman was not a bystander. A Madison County jury convicted him of first-degree murder in 1981. Holman wasn't sentenced to death for a simple reason that still hits hard. He was 17, just weeks shy of 18 at the time of the crime, and that age line mattered under Illinois law. Instead, he received a life sentence. And the record doesn't stop at one case. Illinois DOC also lists separate convictions in St. Clair County for murder and attempted murder from that same era, stacking his time into something close to permanent. Decades later, after U.S. Supreme Court decisions limited life without parole for juveniles, Holman tried to reopen his sentence. In 2017, the Illinois Supreme Court said no, ruling that the original sentencing judge had already considered his youth and background. So today, Holman remains in IDOC custody, effectively locked in place by both his crimes and the law's final word. Number 6. Joshua Minor. In Joliet, Illinois, in January 2013, two men walk into what they think is a normal hangout. A place to drink, talk, maybe buy something, then leave. They don't leave. That case became known in local headlines as the Nightmare on Hickory Street, and the name that keeps surfacing at the center is Joshua Minor, often described as the ringleader. The record shows Minor was part of a small group that brought the victims to a house, then turned the night into a robbery that spiraled into murder. The state's theory wasn't that things got out of hand by accident. It was that Minor helped drive the plan, pushed the intimidation, and stayed involved in what came after. Two men, Eric Glover and Terrence Rankins, were killed, and investigators said the group tried to cover their tracks, moving property, dealing with a vehicle, and managing phones and evidence like people who thought they could outsmart time. Minor's case didn't end with a dramatic jury showdown. He chose a bench trial, meaning a judge heard the evidence and made the call. The judge convicted him of 2 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced him to natural life, the Illinois version of "you're never getting out." Even on appeal, Minor argued the life sentence was unfair as applied to him, pointing to personal history and mental health issues. The appellate court didn't budge. It emphasized the level of planning, the violence, and the behavior after the killings, and it kept the sentence in place. But here's the part that puts Joshua Minor in a different category. Life wasn't the end of his story. Years into his sentence, while housed in an Illinois prison, Minor was accused and later sentenced again after his cellmate, Andrew Ortega, was found deceased. Prosecutors filed a new first-degree murder case, and reports say Minor ultimately received another life without parole sentence on top of the first. That second case changes how people hear the first one, because it suggests the problem wasn't a single night in Joliet. It was the person. A man who was already serving the harshest penalty Illinois can give, and still ended up tied to another killing behind bars. He's still an Illinois inmate, and the sentence is built to end only one way. 2 life sentences, 2 crime scenes, and a record that reads like one long refusal to stop. Number 5. James Degorski. On a Sunday night in August 1993, a fast food place in Palatine, Illinois, was supposed to be closing up. Lights on, chairs up. Employees counting down the register, normal end of shift stuff. Then it turns into one of the most infamous crime scenes in Chicagoland history. 7 people killed inside a Brown's Chicken and Pasta. For years, it was a ghost case. Everybody in the suburbs knew the name. Everybody had a theory. And nothing stuck until the early 2000s, when old evidence and new science finally met in the same room. The case ultimately centered on 2 men who knew the store: Juan Luna, a former employee, and James Degorski, a friend from their school days. Prosecutors argued it started as a robbery for cash, about $1,800. But the brutality wasn't about money alone. It was about leaving no witnesses. The break came when investigators re-examined preserved items from the scene, including food-related evidence. DNA testing linked Luna to the crime, and that reopened everything. Detectives began re-interviewing people from the old circle, and one name kept coming up: Degorski. Trial testimony laid out that Degorski was brought in for questioning in May 2002. The state said the key piece wasn't a fingerprint or a lab result tied directly to him. It was human evidence, what he told people, and what he told police. Witnesses described Degorski making disturbing comments over the years, including a question about whether God could forgive someone for killing. Another witness, an ex-girlfriend, told the jury Degorski admitted involvement and even warned her not to talk. And then there's the confession issue. Investigators said Degorski admitted he personally shot some of the victims. The defense fought hard over interrogation details and reliability, but the jury accepted the state's version. Degorski was convicted of 7 counts of first-degree murder. Jurors found him eligible for the death penalty, but he ultimately received natural life, no parole. The legal system's final word here is simple. He isn't leaving. The reason this case still hits is simple. It wasn't random. It wasn't a personal feud, and it wasn't a heat-of-the-moment fight. It was a place people ate dinner, turned into a nightmare, and a name that took nearly a decade to put on it. Number 4. Robert E. Crimo III. It's the 4th of July in a quiet Chicago suburb. Families line the street in Highland Park, kids on shoulders, folding chairs, music, flags. Then, in the middle of the parade, everything breaks. People start running. Some don't know why yet, only that the sound isn't fireworks. Investigators say the person behind it was Robert E. Crimo III. Crimo was 21 at the time. He grew up in the area, dropped out of high school, and left behind a digital trail that later became part of the investigation. Videos, music, posts that hinted at fixation and anger. Police reports show there were warning signs years earlier, including multiple contacts with officers in 2019 after threats inside the family home. Nothing stuck legally, and life moved on. Until July 4th, 2022. The state's theory was that Crimo opened fire on the parade crowd, killing 7 people and injuring dozens more. He left the area and was arrested later that day, after a large search. From there, the case turned into a long legal grind, not because the facts were unclear, but because the defendant was unpredictable. Crimo was charged with 21 counts of first-degree murder, 3 for each victim, along with dozens of attempted murder counts tied to the injured. The state initially kept the death penalty off the table because Illinois no longer has it, but made clear it would seek the harshest sentence possible. The court process dragged on. Crimo fired and rehired lawyers. He refused to come to court at times. On the eve of trial, in March 2025, after years of delays, he suddenly changed course and pleaded guilty. At sentencing, prosecutors laid out the impact statements, and the planning, they said, went back years. The judge sentenced Crimo to 7 consecutive life sentences without parole, plus additional decades for the attempted murder counts. No parole, no reduction, no path out. Crimo wasn't present when the sentence was read. Today, the Illinois Department of Corrections lists him as serving those life terms, though his exact housing location is not publicly disclosed for security reasons. His father separately pleaded guilty to misdemeanor reckless conduct for helping sponsor his gun permit years earlier, a detail that turned this case into a broader conversation about warning signs and accountability. The horror isn't only the victim count, it's the normal scene it shattered, a holiday parade in a town that didn't see it coming. The red flags existed. The harm arrived anyway. Number 3. Brian J. Dugan. In the Chicago suburbs, some cases don't fade. They sit in the background for decades, names parents still remember, streets that still feel different after dark. One of those reasons is Brian Dugan. By the mid-1980s, Dugan was already on law enforcement radar, with a history that included serious crimes like burglary and arson. But Illinois would come to know him for something far worse, a series of attacks tied to multiple victims, including children, that left entire communities shaken. One of the biggest was the 1983 Jeannine Nicarico case in Naperville. Jeannine was 10 years old. She disappeared from her home, and the investigation became a nightmare, partly because it turned into a cautionary tale about the justice system itself. Years passed, and people were convicted, and later cleared. The damage from that era didn't just hit one family, it hit public trust. Dugan's name kept circling back. According to court coverage, he eventually pleaded guilty in 2009, and a jury sentenced him to death. But in Illinois, the death penalty was already on borrowed time. When the state abolished it, Governor Pat Quinn commuted the remaining death sentences. Dugan's punishment became life in prison, and that's where he remains. The Nicarico case wasn't the only one. Dugan was also tied to other murders in Illinois during that same period, including cases in Kane County and LaSalle County, with additional convictions for crimes like aggravated kidnapping and sexual assault. The legal record reads like a map of violence moving across counties, leaving families behind to carry the weight. Over the years, Dugan became the subject of intense scrutiny, not just as a criminal, but as a human case study. Reports describe extensive psychological evaluations and even neuroscience research that looked at brain scans tied to psychopathy. He also made claims about abuse in his youth, including a reported connection to John Wayne Gacy, claims that have been debated and treated cautiously by investigators and prosecutors. Dugan remains in Illinois custody, with sentences built to last a lifetime. What makes this case chilling isn't only the victims, it's the fallout. Families shattered, years of courtroom battles, and a system that chased the wrong men before it finally landed on him. Number 2. Paul F. Runge. A fire breaks out in a Chicago apartment. Smoke, sirens, neighbors watching from the sidewalk. At first, it looks like a tragedy, one of those nights where an accident takes lives. But detectives start seeing signs it isn't an accident at all. And when the investigation turns from what caused the fire to who caused it, one name rises to the surface: Paul F. Runge. Runge wasn't a stranger to the system. Illinois records show he had already been convicted of serious violent and sexual offenses years earlier. That history mattered, not because it proves the later case by itself, but because it helped investigators understand who they were dealing with. In the late 1990s, prosecutors argued Runge was responsible for the deaths of Yolanda Gutierrez and her young daughter, Jessica Muniz, in a case that started with that apartment fire. Detectives and witnesses described a prosecution built on a combination of forensic evidence, including DNA, and a recorded statement. The jury convicted Runge of 2 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to death, and for a time, he was one of the names Illinois pointed to when people argued about capital punishment. But Runge's story doesn't stay inside that one courtroom file. While under state supervision connected to Illinois' sexually violent persons process, Runge escaped custody during transport in 2000. He was later captured and convicted on additional violent charges tied to what happened after that escape, adding more time and more danger to his profile. It's the kind of detail that changes the way the public hears life sentence, because it suggests even heavy supervision wasn't enough to contain him. Then, in 2011, Illinois abolished the death penalty. Governor Pat Quinn commuted the remaining death sentences, including Runge's, to life without parole. That move didn't free him. It locked him into a different kind of forever. No execution date, but no exit. Around the same period, prosecutors dropped some other pending murder cases they had been considering, because there was no punishment harsher than life without parole left to add. He remains locked into life terms, no parole window, no reset. And the story that sticks isn't just the crimes, it's the arc, a case that began as a fire, became a double murder prosecution, and then kept expanding. Escape, more violence, and a sentence that ends only one way. Number 1. Timothy Wayne Krajcir. In southern Illinois, the kind of place where people leave doors unlocked and neighbors still wave. A pattern started showing up in the late 1970s and early 1980s. Break-ins, attacks, women targeted in their own homes. The cases didn't feel random. They felt like someone was hunting. And for decades, the name behind it stayed missing. That name was Timothy Wayne Krajcir, born Timothy McBride, better known in headlines as the bandana rapist. What makes Krajcir so disturbing isn't just what he did, it's how well he hid in plain sight. During the years investigators say he was offending, Krajcir worked as an EMT in southern Illinois. Co-workers later described him as normal, even helpful. Meanwhile, court reporting and later investigations linked him to a string of violent sexual assaults and murders across state lines: Illinois, Missouri, Kentucky, and beyond. The story changes decades later with one word: DNA. As technology improved, old evidence from cold cases started talking. Investigators tied Krajcir to crimes that had been unsolved since the Carter era. In Illinois, he was connected to the murder of Deborah Shepard, a Southern Illinois University student, and to other cases in the region. In Kentucky, he pleaded guilty in a case involving Joyce Tharp, receiving life-related time on top of everything else. Each new link didn't just add charges. It rewrote the history of towns that had spent years wondering who was doing it. And here's the gut punch. Krajcir's crimes weren't only about victims. They also created collateral damage in the justice system. In one Illinois case, a man named Grover Thompson was wrongfully convicted of an assault that Krajcir later admitted to. Thompson died before he could fully clear his name. In 2019, Illinois issued a posthumous pardon, an official admission that the wrong man paid for the right predator. Krajcir ended up with stacked sentences that effectively mean he will die in prison. Reports also note that allegations involving abuse of minors were part of his record, which only deepens the sense that his violence had no safe boundaries. Today, he's an Illinois inmate with a multi-state trail behind him, proof that sometimes the scariest offenders aren't the ones who look like monsters. They're the ones wearing a uniform, doing a normal job, while the real life stayed hidden for decades.